actually engage so much in issues of development and innovation of products and manufacturing. So I think we're also getting a very big problem there, and I hope maybe you'll throw more comments on that. Then 3, I pose it to the rest of us as we're here and probably beyond. It is the issue of, we're talking about public health, isn't it? Can I say public health versus public trust? So let's combine the two and see this. We bring back the case that we're using much, which is the COVID. We had the vaccines in place, isn't it? And we had that whole range, the J&J, the AstraZeneca, and others. Just imagine maybe number last was Ugandan vaccine. And so you're lining up and you have a choice. Which one would you pick? I've not heard anyone saying the Ugandan vaccine. So, as we are promoting public health, how best can you also bring in the issue of public trust when it comes to issues of us promoting local manufacture of pharmaceuticals? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I request that we have more 2 and then get back to the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe just to reply quickly in somewhat a way with your last comment you made. In the Pan-African Mental Health Research Network, which happens to be a very big network where most of my colleagues seated here, Dr. David Musoki, Matthew, Pamela, Sally, Grace, what we are trying to do within the network is actually bring in the collaboration between the traditional health healers and the biomedical health healers. I think that could be a way to resolve that issue of trust, because to a greater extent, as you rightly stated, when you're looking at medicine and you put a Ugandan drug, or let's say a Ghanaian drug, and a Western drug down, obviously the greater percentage will go for the Western drug. It's all because of how our mindset has been wired up to this stage. So I think that could be a way that we could do this. But then again, coming back to the conversation on trips, like when you look at it in greater detail, at first glance, you may think it was meant for good, because you do not want to have non-standardized kind of medicine or drugs available for people to use. So the idea was just to get people to have the license, that's the big pharma, to have the license to be able to operate and use enough resources to be able to produce these drugs. But then again, the poor cannot afford these drugs because the big pharma at the end of the day are going in for their profit. So the poor at the end of the day cannot afford these drugs that you're actually producing or manufacturing for them. And it brings a very big problem. And that brings in the discussion about marketization and corporatization, somewhere that was kind of made a very firm institution, or given the go-ahead in somewhere in 1980, if I'm not mistaken. A year later, we got the 1981 HIV/AIDS pandemic coming up, which was like, you've now accepted that there should be a license for this. Now, this drugs needs to also be done, but they are actually affecting the poor. And the poor can't afford the drugs that you have licensed. So there is a problem there that needs to be resolved. And then goes back to that idea of investing more in our traditional medicine, trying to bring in that collaboration between the biomedicals and the traditional healers. That could make it a bit more effective and bring in the trust that you mentioned. But I also have a question that I want to put forward, which is the Doha Declaration, which was, I think, brought up somewhere in 2001. What happened with the Doha Declaration? Because at first glance, again, at the Doha Declaration, you'll notice that it was meant to actually reduce the prices of these drugs for the people of the poor. But the problem was with the trade, because people were afraid of what will happen when they go back to the IMF or the Western, that consensus that they have to go for maybe some kind of fund for, to support them within their country. So they step aside. That's a poor country, and they just go with the normal trade system or framework that they have. So what happened with the Doha Declaration? Has it been ignored? Because these are frameworks that can be built on in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. One more.
Thank you so much. My name is Samuel. I work with Maristops, the Youth and Key Populations Lead. Listening to the deliberations, some questions popped up in my mind. There are a lot of issues that require the attention of the people in power, the people in leadership. I'm wondering whether I have them here. That's something that we should think about. Thank you.
Thank you so much. One more. Lastly.
Thank you very much, our panelists. Well, I'm not vertically challenged, but I will stand to honor my former boss, Mr. Dr. Dennis Kibera. My questions were actually triggered by the first two people that asked on that first table. I wanted to ask Dr. Dennis, to what extent are the public-private partnerships being leveraged to support the local vaccine production initiatives? And maybe what are some of the successful examples that we have there? And then for Ms. Penina, how are the local institutions and workforce being trained and equipped to meet the technical regulatory requirements for the vaccine production? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I would like to first appreciate distinguished participants for those provoking questions and also contributions to the discussion. My brother, you are tempting me to... Okay, but maybe just because of interest of time, can we put that on the parking lot just to be able to wrap up this? But we will come back again after lunch to continue with the discussion. Yes, but I'd like to thank you all for those provoking questions and contributions. And to my two panelists, I think your plate is full. Please respond to some of those questions that have come up from the discussions. But also, you will be also giving your parting shots so that we wrap up this before we are chased from this stage. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay, I'll start. Sorry. In regards to the different policies, definitely the policies need to be strengthened first for the economy, but of course I believe when you look at the discussion around how best these policies are fit for purpose, it's that we get to see also opportunities where we can actually utilize this time to review and actually put in place policies that would actually enhance more and boost production, but also, like you've mentioned, the economy itself. Because if we have a weak economy, we cannot also hold ground. We shall be ending up having to rely so much on external support. And external support can come in different ways. And we need to pay more attention to how best can we utilize the angle of reviewing these policies. We have tried to take an initial step of also engaging with the relevant institutions that are necessary when it comes to this discussion. When it comes to the National Drug Authority, National Planning Authority, because most of these discussions need to also be focused in a mindset of where it cuts across throughout all areas, which is cross-cutting really for vaccine manufacturing. It can't be a Ministry of Health issue and also be left alone to them. It has to also be a National Drug Authority issue. It has, when it comes to regulations, it has to come down to also the different bodies that are supposed to support these areas, private sector, coming in to actually support some of these discussions. But we can only foster it when we also have to share more of the information and build their capacity, because then they will not feel that they're being effectively being utilized, but also they have shared their concerns. How best have we been able to, how best has government been able to address these concerns that they have shared? When it comes to all the challenges that they face as a private sector, there's need for us to open up to sharing, because we need to understand that for vaccine local manufacturing, it will take not just one element, but all of a number of different bodies, and the private sector is really the main anchor that would see to it that government should be able to support more. communities and indigenous knowledge. I'm glad that you've shared this, because for the greater aspect of when it comes to trips, I know there are a number of discussions that have come out in how best are we able to patent this knowledge. And I believe, and I know that Uganda has a law, or is it an act still, but it's around indigenous knowledge. But the problem is that we have all these policies, but we are not seeing how best to see to it that we have regulations or protect, even how to go about protecting such indigenous knowledge. So you find for the most part is that countries that I've seen that have gone ahead to do so have gained more, because for a long time, while there are so many, we have opened up, we have liberalized heavily, we have seen more of these plants being accessed, this knowledge being taken, and we have nothing to do with it. And yet you get to realize for the greater percentage of this production, it entails highly on indigenous knowledge before the science comes in as well. So you get to realize both of these attributes need to be really focused. And I feel like for the aspect of Uganda, we need to do so much better when it comes to even encouraging indigenous knowledge. You find most of it has been kept either secretly, or some also trying to gain from actually producing. And even when they do, they're still heavily challenged, because they will come out with challenges of either when it comes to standards, which is okay, at least for someone to know their standards need to be enhanced. So why don't we find ways of building their capacity to have their standards also, standards and other elements being also addressed when it comes to their production, which can encourage more of the market, which you can look at and try to see how best to position such discussions and to favorably support local knowledge discussions also going around. It shouldn't be just focused on science, because at the end of the day, the two have to work together. So we need to have an enabling environment for it. When it comes to bilateral and multilateral agreements, of course, the challenges that we have seen, most of these agreements have been signed on a daily. Even right now, they could be signed in one, because more and more developed countries are getting more interested and have still, for a very long time, have shown their interest in Africa, but generally also in now bilateral agreements. So you get to realize, even with the different protocols that we do have, as a country, we know so many different institutions hold a much different contribution when it comes to signing these different agreements. There could be one on energy, it is being signed by the Ministry of Energy. It could be one on health, it could be Ministry of Health going ahead to sign it. So you get to find there is a challenge to how we see our different bilateral and multilateral agreements being signed, but also the policy right now is that we know we have a Ratification of Treaties Act. It's quite an old one because we have not taken initiative to review the act, and it's what we're trying to put pressure on for government to review this act, most especially because it limits the powers of public consultation, where we have also Parliament also having oversight to see to it that they're able to be, these agreements are reviewed more consecutively, which is not the case. Once they're signed, most of them go on the shelf, and for most of the time we've had to remind institutions or government about an agreement that is actually yet to be terminated, or should be or should not. And you find for most cases those deadlines pass, and eventually they automatically get renewed. These agreements don't come back for us, from them to review with us. It is us as a country and as a government should be able to review most of these agreements. But we're seeing that as a challenge. I think for the most aspect is also that the institutions that should be able to understand most of these agreements have left it really to, what are we seeing? More foreign direct investment, and that is it. And yet you get to realize it goes further than that. It goes to impacting communities, impacting the most marginalized, but also seeing that most of the discussions now, like the intellectual property rights provisions, competition, are actually also being looked at with an open mindset, which is not the case. So even for the loopholes that we see in these agreements is that we are failing to see to it that we gain more from them rather than them gaining more from us. So we need to look at, and it's what we have pushed at Seatini when it comes to renegotiating most of these agreements. We can actually have a more stronger hold as a country to look to renegotiate, but most of that takes a lot of effort from the government to also be able to take into consideration our positions, but also to understand that these agreements need to foster development and structural transformation. In regards to the trips, then I could leave, well, there's that one of the non-standardized. I don't know if I had captured it very well, but for the trips discussion is that, of course, if we didn't have them, would be at a big challenge, of course, getting substandard goods, getting even challenges with just having access to medicine or other areas. However, we need to also take into mind that now more than ever, they're also being used or being manipulated in a way that foster more of the developed countries from gaining more access to using those patents and copyrights to protect them and to have them more of commodify highly the health sector, which shouldn't be the case. So you get to see big pharma companies get more supported by their government to actually utilize these provisions, which should be also the case for us to see to it that we support our local manufacturers to be able to also utilize these provisions, even as a country in generally, because you get to realize most of these provisions do share a bigger element on how, when it comes to the aspects of how best are we able to see our interests being met. And that is a big challenge. We see that escalating. And while the WTO reform is on a discussion right now, we are not sure whether this will be also addressed clearly. But we need to take into consideration that we have IPR policies as a country that we should be able to address to strengthen the missing links or the gaps. And those have been mainly in trying to see that the patents, most of this information and products should be patented, and also having a market in mind. Just my last is PPPs will be Dennis. I'll leave that to you. For my last parting shot would be that ideally for a discussion around trade policy is that most of it has been viewed as highly technical, which should not be the case. For where government has had to represent and negotiate as a country on behalf of the country in the different ministerial conferences that the WTO has, we have seen that it is more necessary to have a partnership and collaboration with them to support their capacity as well, but also to support the position that we want to see being tabled as a country. So as Seatini, and in regards to the other CSOs that we try to bring on board, we have tried to see that we have a pre-run before most of these negotiations are taken on. Why? Because we see that strengthening a Uganda position, or is it a regional position, needs to be first addressed before the conference, but also even in regards to actually seeing where exactly does government or where are the people even being challenged would be better with one voice. So we need to see to it that we strengthen those partnerships. We need to see that also the aspect of vaccine is not kept within this room, but taken out to a higher level when it comes to regional aspects, engaging with IALA, but also seeing to it that these frameworks that are in place do create an enabling environment for local production, but also structural transformation for our development.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for Ms. Penny Nambabazi. Thank you. I now invite Dr. Dennis Kibera to respond to some of the questions, but also build on to the discussion and also share your parting shot. Thank you.
Thank you, Herbert. Thank you for listening to us. This is a very boring topic. Thank you for keeping awake. Regarding the questions, I think the question that has come out most, you sounded it, and it was also resounded by 2 or 3 other participants. Why Africa is not utilizing our resources, the question around alternative medicine. I think for me, this is a very big discussion. It's a discussion that takes us back to how the current systems we have been constructed, and how we, in the current dispensation of decolonizing global health, how we can put that into perspective. When you look at the education systems that we have, when you look at our current governance, even the clothes I'm wearing, These were brought by our colonial masters. We've embraced them, which these are good things we can embrace. But what we have done is put away everything that we knew, which is very bad. So when you talk about traditional medicine, someone is going to think about witchcraft. So we're not going to change this now because this has been more than 100 years in building. But as we think about decolonizing global health, we need to see how do we utilize the good things we've gotten. That's our system now, and how do we take advantage? And I would love to see what Nottingham Trent is doing in the communities, because I think this is a whole construct that needs to be made. How can we utilize the TRIPS flexibilities? I think, again, if you look at the discussions at the TRIPS, the WTO, the Council, the World Trade Organization Ministerial Council, you can see that a lot of the discussion is led by, a lot of the resolutions are influenced by the Western world. I think we need to have our representatives empowered to represent us well. I remember at the last ministerial council, when we were pushing for COVID vaccines, a waiver of these trips on COVID vaccines, we wrote to the, when I was still at HEPS, we wrote to the Ministry of Health, the Director General, wanted for an agenda to be pushed at the council. And I remember when someone from the Director General's office called me, telling me, what are you talking about? These things you're talking about, we have no idea. And so again, it goes back to the question about our negotiators and the people that represent us. I think we need to continuously empower these people to be able to ably represent us. The current window around, there's a push now on local production. Globally, everyone is pushing for local production of medicines in Africa. I think this is a key window for us to help us utilize the flexibilities. And so we need to unpack these flexibilities and say, right now, most of the African countries are least developed countries. It's a window for us to develop our industry because we do not have to respect anything in the TRIPS agreement. We have a transition period. We can use the data we have to learn. We can reverse engineer. We can do absolutely everything. But all this requires investment. And investment, I think, working in collaboration with academia, Dr. Msoke is here, to see how does Uganda take advantage. So these discussions need to be continuous. I've talked about the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing, which was launched 2 years ago with an ambitious target of having 60% production of our vaccine needs by 2030. But I'll tell you that a government official from Uganda who had been in discussion with approached the secretariat at PAVAM to try to see, okay, how does Uganda benefit from this initiative? What can we do? They got no answer. So it shows, again, to the point of we have these good policies globally at regional level, but even at country level. We just don't know about how to move them. And so let us move. If this PAVAM has 8 pillars, I think as a country, Uganda, we can say, okay, which pillar is a low-lying fruit for us? And we push it as a country. I think the questions around the policy space was answered. The other one,
training, I think again, I could have answered that when I talked about the construct of our current education system. At the moment, local production is not a priority for the Ugandan training. But again, we need to push and say, okay, how does academia work with local industry to, in some sense they're doing so, but it needs to be a focused agenda by the government. And these opportunities are in place because some countries out there, even these big pharma, are willing to take interns from Uganda to train in their industries. But who is coordinating that process? Who is interested in that process anyway? So I think there's key issues for us to answer and come to reality with. The promotion of public trust in our locally produced pharmaceuticals. I think this is a big issue. It's not just an issue we just have to speak about. When I watch television every day, you can see that there's an agenda being pushed. You know, if you watch sports and you say watch the NBA, I don't know what NBA is, National Basketball Association or something like that. But you know, which is in the US, but when they are playing, they think of themselves as they are the best in the world. And that's what they push. When you look at the Coca-Colas of this world, and there must be a deliberate interest by the country to say we are pushing this agenda. So it will move beyond just one sector. And again, that speaks to, maybe let me add that to the question, Carol's question on utilization of private-public partnerships. We have a law, and maybe the law is good, maybe it has some gaps, but how many people know about this law? How are we assessing this law and ensuring that we take advantage of it? There have been some good highlights that have come out of that. I think the Quality Chemicals Sipla plant is an example of, it's been taken as a good case study of a good public-private partnership. Pfizer BioNTech are launching a partnership to produce vaccines in Rwanda. There are several others. At the moment, there are about 30 initiatives for vaccine manufacturing across the continent. But the key issue there is that every country is rushing to be part of such initiatives and not thinking about the market that you talked about, and not thinking, how do we collaborate? Maybe if these ones are producing this vaccine, let us provide them with something, maybe cassava that may help as an adhesive, or some other components that could be used in the value chain. So there is need, again, I think, at the African Union level, to sit and say, who has capacity for what? How do we manage the market? What do we export? How do we export? How do we use the African continental free trade area properly? So the opportunities are in place. We need more discussions like this. We need more policymakers, as was clearly mentioned. But they also need to be interested. They need to be interested because there is having the discussions and there is moving these discussions. Then lastly, I think someone mentioned Doha Declaration. What has happened to it? I think that from the Doha Declaration is where the TRIPS flexibilities came. Many countries have incorporated these flexibilities in their laws. But you know, having a law and shelving it is one thing. Making that law see the light of day is another thing. And I think that's where we need to focus our attention as a continent. We need to walk the talk. We need to unpack these good policies that we have. We need to take advantage of the global policy space that is in place. And you know, when you read the pharmaceutical manufacturing plan for Africa, and you see what it's trying to put across. When you look at the partnership for the framework for the partnership for vaccine manufacturing in Africa, you see very, very good things. Most of them are interlinked, but I think at the end of the day, we are going to be seeing who has a bigger mandate. I think most of these institutions are saying who can absorb the most money. You're going to see institutions running after the money. I think these institutions need to sit down, collaborate, see how do we all work together to ensure that there is policy coherence, but more so implementation of these policies. Thank you.
Thank you so much to my esteemed panelists for those rich and deep insights. Speaking to the theme of the session, trade-related policies, facilitating or hindering vaccine manufacturing, and equitable access in Africa. And to you, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being an engaging audience. You were so active and contributed to the discussion. And special thanks to People's Health Movement, Uganda chapter, for inviting Seatini to organize this session as part of the Advancing Health Equity through Collaborative Action Conference. And I think the discussion cannot stop here. Let's engage online. Follow Seatini. On X, we are at Seatini Uganda. And across all social media platforms, you'll find Seatini. Thank you so much. I've been your moderator, Herbert Kafero, Programs and Communications Manager, Seatini Uganda. Thank you.